Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of the day you're watching this video, it's A-OK. Thank you for tuning in of day 2 of Brian's Winter. So today we're going to read chapter 2. If you did not listen to chapter 1 yesterday, you need to go back and watch that video. If you did watch chapter 1 yesterday, congratulations. Welcome to chapter 2. We're about to get right into it. But before we get into it, I want to do some quick shout outs. First off, I want to shout out everybody that tuned in and listened to chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any feedback for me, if my reading wasn't good enough for you, if I was reading too fast, reading too slow, reading too loud, reading too low, let me know. Second off, shout out to everybody who answered the questions and sent them in to Mr. Jones, or you just talked with your parents, or you just had a conversation with them around the questions. Good job. I want to give a special shout out. The first answers I got, I think I got them like super early in the morning, right after the video dropped, was Lamyra. So Lamyra, she sent her answers in very quickly, so shout out to her. Quanell, me and Quanell's mom were going back and forth because Quanell had some trouble logging in on YouTube. He couldn't get through to it, so he had to navigate, and he ended up watching it on the YouTube app on his TV, I think. So shout out to Quanell for navigating. And just shout out to Kim because I'm wearing my awesome teacher socks. So shout out to Kim. And shout out to Kim for being the only one that commented. And she picked option 5 for the glasses. It wasn't a lot of vote for glasses, so it was a tight race. But as you can see, option 5 won. It was very close to option 6 winning. I also have to read in sunglasses, so I'm glad I didn't have to do that. Okay, so before we get into it, one more thing. I want to do a quick review of chapter 1. So if you remember, chapter 1, we know now that Brian did not get rescued by the plane. So he was still fending for himself. He could kind of feel that the wind was getting colder, so we know that winter's coming. But Brian was just now figuring out that hey, it went. He didn't even know that fall was here. It switched from summer to fall to winter, so winter was about to start. It's kind of just the introduction, as you see in most books. The first chapter is just going to be introducing you to the setting and what's going on. So we see that Brian's in the forest. We see his 68th day in the forest, and he's still pretty much doing the same thing. He's just trying to survive day by day, making sure his shelter is good, making sure that he's getting food and all those good things. So that's pretty much where we left off in chapter 1. He went to bed by his fire, and he's starting to realize that it's getting colder and colder. He needs to appreciate the fire and appreciate his shelter. So without further ado, we're going to get right into chapter 2. So new addition, I'm going to add some sounds in while I'm reading. So I got some campfire sounds playing, you know the vibes, just to get it going. So, chapter 2. Should have already been there, I'm sorry. Chapter 2. For 2 weeks, the weather grew warmer, and each day was more glorious than the day before. Hunting seemed to get better as well. Brian took full birds or rabbits every day, and on one single day, he took 3 full birds. He ate everything and felt fat and lazy, and one afternoon, he actually lay in the sun. It was perhaps wrong to say he was happy. He spent too much time in loneliness for true happiness, but he found himself smiling as he worked around the camp and actually looked forward to bringing in wood in the soft afternoons just because it kept him out of rummaging around in the woods. He had made many friends, or at least acquaintances. Birds had taken on a special significance for him. At night, the owls made their soft sounds, calling each other in almost ghostly whoos that scared him until he finally saw one call on a night when the moon was full and so bright it was almost like a cloudy day. He slept with their calls and before long would awaken if they didn't call. Before dawn, just as gray light began to filter through the trees, the daybirds began to sing. They started slowly, but before the gray had become light enough to see 10 yards, all the birds started to sing, and Brian was brought out of sleep by what seemed to be thousands of singing birds. At first it all seemed to be noise, but as he learned and listened, he found them all to be different. Robins had an evening song, and one they sang right before a rainstorm, and another when the rain was done. Blue jays spent all their time complaining and swearing, but they also warned him when anything, was moving in the woods. Ravens and crows were the same, squawking and cawing their way through the trees. It was all, Brian found, about territory. Everybody wanted to own a place to live, a place to hunt. Birds didn't sing for fun. They sang to warn other birds to keep away, sang to tell them to stay out of their territory. He had learned about property from the wolves. Several times he had seen a solitary wolf, a large male that came near the camp and studied the boy. The wolf did not seem to be afraid and did nothing to frighten Brian, and Brian even thought of him as a kind of a friend. The wolf seemed to come on a regular schedule, hunting, and Brian guessed that he ran a kind of circuit. At night, while gazing at the fire, Brian figured out that if the wolf made 5 miles an hour and hunted 10 hours a day, he must be traveling a close to 100-mile loop. After a month or so, the wolf brought a friend, a smaller, younger male. And the second time they both came, they stopped near Brian's camp. And while Brian watched, they peed on a rotten stump. Both going twice on the same spot. That's nasty. Brian had read about wolves and seen films about them and knew that they left sign, using urine to mark their territory. He had also read, he thought in a book by Farley Mowat, that the wolves respected each other's territories as well as their own. As soon as they were all away from the old stump, Brian went up and peed where they had left the sign. Ugh. 5 days later, when they came through again, Brian saw them stop, smell where he had gone, and then spot the ground next to Brian's spot, accepting his boundary. Good, he thought. I own something now. I belong. And he had gone on with his life believing that the wolves, and he had settled everything. But wolf rules and Brian rules only applied to wolves and Brian. Then the bear came. Dun dun dun. Brian had come to know bears as well as he knew wolves or birds. They were usually alone, unless it was a female with cubs, and they were absolutely, totally devoted to eating. He had seen them several times while picking berries, raking the bushes with their teeth to pull the fruit off, and a goodly number of leaves as well, which they spit out before swallowing the berries, and as with the wolves, they seemed to get along with them. That is to say, Brian would see them eating, and he would move away and let them pick where they wanted, while he found another location. It worked for the bears, he thought, smiling, and it worked for him. And this thinking evolved into what Brian thought of as an understanding between him and the bears. Since he left them alone, they would leave him alone. Unfortunately, the bears did not know that it was an agreement, and Brian was suffering under the misunderstanding, as in some imaginary political correct society, everything was working out. All of this made him totally unprepared for the reality of the woods. To wit, bears and wolves did what they wanted to do, and Brian had to fit in. He was literally awakened to the facts one morning during the 2-week warm spell. Brian had been sleeping soundly and woke up to the clunking sound of metal on rock. His mind and ears were turned to all the natural sounds around him, and there was no sound in nature of metal on stone. It snapped him awake in mid-breath. He was sleeping with his head in the opening of the shelter, and he had his face out, and when he opened his eyes, he saw what appeared to be a wall of black-brown fur directly in front of him. He thought he might be dreaming, and he shook his head, but it didn't go away, and he realized in the same moment that he was looking at the rear end of a bear. No, he thought, with a clinical logic that surprised him, I'm looking at the very large rear end of a very large bear. The bear had come to Brian's camp, smelling the gut smell of the dead rabbit and the cooking odor from the pot. The bear did not see it as Brian's camp or territory. There was a food smell. It was hungry. It was time to eat. I want to stop for a second, and I want you to pause the video after I ask this question. I want you to think about what was the difference between the wolf and the bear? If the wolf came and didn't mess with Brian's shelter, didn't mess with his food, and it might have been because Brian marked his territory with the you-know-what, but Brian did the same thing, and the bear didn't respect it. So I want you to stop and answer why you think the wolf didn't mess with Brian, but the bear did. Once you're done, you can play it, and then we'll get back to it.